In a 40-year career in self-storage, he's seen everything from floods to fingerprints. Hear about that on the Stories Behind the Door podcast with the president of Cutting Edge Feasibility, Stephan Ross. Oh, this one has been a long time coming. Really excited. Steve Ross, we've known each other now for going on 4 years. I'm actually surprised it's taken me this long to get you roped into being on the podcast. Thanks for coming and joining me for a half hour.
Absolutely.
Listen, the podcast always starts the same way, and I've been excited for this since I talked to you. We were together earlier this week, which was awesome, by the way. Really fun to get to hang out and hear some things that I actually want to touch on because you shared some incredible information in the time I got to be around you. But I always start the podcast off the same way. And for me, with you, this is an exciting question to ask because I'm excited to hear the answer. How did you get your start in self-storage?
That is a good story. I was actually working. My wife and I were married. We had a little baby, and I had been working the docks down in Salt Lake, and they had layoffs. And I was going to college, and I was thinking, man, this is kind of sweet not working. But after about 2 weeks, my wife was like, we need to find a job. And I started in '85. My wife and I as live on-site managers for National Self-Storage here in Salt Lake. Wow. So I started out as an on-site, live on-site manager.
I think that's fantastic. One of the things that I firmly remember when I first got into this business back in 2021, just a little bit after you, not much, but a little bit, you did the feasibility studies and still do, and have an amazing business helping self-storage developers get their bank loans by showing a feasibility study that proves the efficacy of a project. But in your feasibility study, I'll never forget this, it jumped out to me. You talk about having a live-in space over facilities, and they're still there. We were just out in McIntyre, Colorado at a facility that our mutual acquaintance, Barry Sherman, helped to build. And there's an apartment on the second story of the main building. The office is underneath, and the husband and wife that run that facility live in that apartment. What's the advantages to having that on a site?
Definitely pros and cons. And if you YouTube me, which I'm sure people will, you'll hear me on both sides of this story because I preach forever not to do it and I've preached to do it. The main advantages are your property insurance is cheaper if you have an on-site manager as opposed to not. But the biggest thing is if you can afford to put them on site, the managers don't leave as fast. Because you get somebody like me who does a feasibility that finds a really good manager that's your competition, but not a live on site. And when I open up, I can come in and offer them a couple bucks an hour more, and they'll come work for me because it's not an apartment. The things with apartments, you got to make sure you put it upstairs and not single story. National Self Storage years ago converted apartments, and because they didn't have them, put them all single story. Problem is, then everybody runs inside to cook dinner, do laundry, and they're not running their office. So you got to do it upstairs. But the main reason is basically that just keeps the people away you don't want. I mean, we kind of talked earlier about that. Storage units are great, but I've had bodies in units, I've had drugs in units, and you don't typically get that with an on-site manager. And I just did a feasibility in San Antonio where 13 competitors, only 2 had apartments, and the only 2 that were over 97% occupied were the 2 with apartments, and all the rest were in the low 90s. So, I mean, it just depends on the market.
That's incredible. I was going to ask you, I was going to say, just hard to get, extension cord into a wall plug and set up your bed and TV in the unit when there's someone walking around every day living on site, right?
Correct. And that's what you want. You just want to keep the bad element away. And you may not even remember this. Years ago, for a while, they were doing fingerprints for every new rentals. I don't know if you were around when they were doing that. That was probably 15, 20 years ago. And again, nobody knew how to do a correct fingerprint. Minico was one that did them, and all the sites did them. All the REITs, everybody. So you had on-site manager or the managers fingerprinting all new tenants coming in, and all it was for was to keep anybody that was like, we don't want our fingerprints. We're like, yeah, we don't want you renting here. Go have a good day. But for about 4 years, everybody was fingerprinting.
A little barrier to entry just to kind of weed out the riffraff before they get in. Oh, that's awesome. I want to hear the story. We know you got into storage in 1985. You're managing a store. How did you progress into getting into doing feasibility studies?
I started in 85 with National, and then National Self Storage hired my wife and I to do what was called a city manager, and we ran all of Utah. And at that time, the president of National was a gentleman named Joe Nimchek, and the treasurer was a gentleman named Mel Holsinger. They formed a company called Executive, hired my wife and I, and we ran everything east of the Mississippi, New York to Key West.
Mhm.
In 96, Extra Space hired me because they wanted to become a REIT. When they hired me, they had 9 properties nationwide. In nine,
Mind-boggling, by the
yeah,
way.
in 98, that's when the first feasibility request came into Extra Space. We didn't have anything set up. And that was pre all the software you have now. So I remember I told them I could figure out how to do one. And it was the old Rand McNally maps, laying them out with your compass. And so everything was done by hand. So 98 was the first feasibility I did. It was for Extra Space. And then I did the feasibilities for them till I left in 2000. And I've been doing America. That's all I do now. I don't do management, anything else now. All I do is feasibilities, US, Mexico, and Canada.
So interested to pick your brain because look, I was alive in 1985. I turned 12 years old that year. Remember it, Hurricane Gloria on my birthday is a year that will stick in my head forever because my birthday party, the eye of a hurricane literally went over my
Oh,
house. But anyway,
oh,
totally different story.
yeah,
You
that's a
know,
story.
listen, we had a house phone with a cord that extended like 40 feet, right? With
Yep.
no computers. I think my friend got a Commodore 64 a couple years after that. You know, we used to play the Moonlander game with the dot matrices that would go up and down across the screen, right? A far cry from what the world looks like now.
Oh,
Talk to me a little bit about your experience in storage and maybe similarities to 1985, but some of the differences you're seeing in facilities now as you go to do a feasibility study. What a Class A facility looks like now versus when you first got in the business.
when I first got in the business, you were lucky if things were fenced in. I mean, we thought we were big time if you had an electronic gate system, and that was it. I mean, you had a gate, everything was drive up doors. The next big thing was people starting to get into temperature control and stuff. And security, of course, started getting better. We started getting, electronic gates and cameras and uh, individual door alarms or keyless entry. I mean, they came a long ways, but it went to temperature control for a while. Then climate control, which are 2 different animals. People that tell you they're the same are the ones that get sued and lose in court. So they are different. If you're not controlling the humidity in your storage unit, you better just call yourself temperature control or heated and cooled, or you will lose a lawsuit. And I know a couple people that have. And then you started seeing, which has always been around, but you started seeing people getting into more of the parking, and they've always had the outdoor parking. But over the years, then the next kind of darling that came around was going. So it went kind of drive up units, then you had temperature control, then you started getting a mix of some boat and RVs, and then people got smart and said, let's canopy them and 3-side them. And then people started doing flex space, which is, man caves. I just did a man cave feasibility in Florida right before I met you last week. So what I'm seeing mostly now are the biggest changes have been, at least in the last 20 years, is security is the biggest. I mean, there used to be a time you only put even Extra Space. In 96, when I went to work for them, when we would lay out a new site, cameras were so expensive back then that didn't matter how big it was 8 cameras, 1 on each touchpad, 1 in the office, and it gave us 5 in the facility, and that's it. But nowadays, cameras have gotten so cheap. I've seen people putting cameras, and I'm sure you have too, in every unit where
Yeah.
people can change their own batteries and watch their own interior unit from their house. So that's the biggest thing. And the length of stay. When I first started in storage, we used to project 90 days was the average stay of self-storage. That was it, 3 months. That's what you would use for projections on feasibilities, all that. Now, depending on what publication you read, but it's roughly 17 months is the average stay for residential, little over 2 years for commercial.
It makes it going from 3 months to 17 months makes a wee bit of difference on a pro forma.
A little bit.
That's
And then pricing.
hilarious.
And that's probably the biggest thing I think everybody battles with now is this dynamic pricing that mainly the REITs are doing. which makes it hard for the mom and pop. And it's still, everybody that says the REITs have taken over, and I could be off on this a little bit, but last time I checked, they're still only right around that 40% of the whole market. And I think that's a little high on the projection. So it's still a mom and pop industry. But, and as you know, when we were talking about it, I think this dynamic pricing will change, or at least come into a head real in with some of these states that have got some bills in the house
Headwinds.
trying to pass.
Yeah.
In the old days, late fees were that way. We used to charge a fortune for late fee. We made more in late fees than rent back in the 90s. It was fantastic. But when they regulated that, they'll do the same thing with rent increases. That'll come down. And the multi-story, you never used to see multi-story. Now you see multi-story in most your primary markets. Secondary markets, you're not as much. But primary is almost everything multi-story.
I'm interested to pick your brain. A couple things here I want to talk. I want to talk about the discount strategies with ECRIs and how challenging that had to have made it for you 2023, 2024, trying to do a feasibility study on something when the web rates in like markets we would have thought would have been at $25, $30 are like less than 10. How did that challenge you? And then the other thing, I just forgot the other question I was going to ask. So I'm gonna ask you that one first. How challenging for you when you're doing a feasibility study has it been for the last couple of years to be able to really get the right info to a developer when the REITs, which if they're in a market, everyone's got to kind of compete with them, are employing this discount strategy where sometimes hard to fathom how low they were putting prices. How do you, as the person doing the feasibility, really dig in and find out what's really going on in that market?
So I'll take, like everybody else, Radius, Track Q, all those for the current pricing. But then we physically shop either in person, by phone, both to get their current rates. And of course, especially with a lot of the, what do they call it? The phone centers now. Yeah,
Call
well,
centers,
some are
yeah.
doing it all. So that makes it a little difficult. Lucky for me, it's the fact I have been around for blessed ever. So I have a lot of friends. So what the REITs do is I got friends at pretty much every REIT. So I can call them up and be like, okay, I'm looking at this market. This is a perfect example. I have one opening in Cape Coral, Florida. Supposed to get the C of O for a guy I did the feasibility on, and I found him as land form as a site identification. But anyway, our closest competitor is Extra Space, and they're online posted 5x10 temperature control unit. Move-in rent rate $7, which is
Wow.
absolutely insane. But I was able to
For
find
those of
out.
you who don't listen to, or don't understand, or you're not on the acquisition side, you're looking for, 50 plus $75 on a 5x10 minimum to want to build, and they're offering it at $7.
But the catch was the REITs are just like us. They're all doing their own studies and their own performance. So I just call people I know and be like, okay, internally, what are you projecting? And they'll give me the rate. So they give you an idea. On the 5x10 when I called my friend, they'll project over 17 months what they want to average. And the average for that unit projection was $179 a month, which meant they will project at the high end. So if you start really low, at least my buddies at REITs, the most they will do is 7 increases in a year, but they will project 7 increases so that by the end of that 17 months, you'll actually be paying more than the 179 to make up for what you were short.
The average.
But anyway, long story short, for me, I couldn't do it if I didn't have people I could call that would tell me. And of course, it's off the record because they don't like to tell you what their internal projections are.
Right.
But again, I've been around forever. So all the REITs, there's only a couple that I can't get a lot, but the big ones, U-Haul, Public, CubeSmart, Extra Space, I got people I can call.
That's the beauty of having spent an entire career in an industry. I remembered my other question, which was the proliferation of multi-story, but we're seeing multi-story in some tertiary markets where you're like, do we really want to build a 3-story in a town that's got 20,000? I'm going to ask you that question in a second, but I want to ask you about this industry. I'm 4 years in, and I can honestly say I'm 51 years old. I spent, more than 20 years in other industries before I got here. Talk to me a little bit about self-storage and maybe why it is the way it is.
the way it is. You mean why? I'm sorry, I
Like
missed.
just how I should have defined that question better. The people are just so much different. The way people
Oh,
interact with each other in self-storage. We were together on Monday and Tuesday. Barry Sherman and S3 Partners had their yearly vendor meetup, had a summit on Tuesday, and there's 15, 20 people in the room. Just the way people interact with each other, I find it to be fascinating.
self-storage, I've noticed too. And again, I kind of spent my whole life in it, so I don't have a whole lot to prep. Before I
Be
went to work for,
thankful for that because not everywhere is like self-storage is. I can promise you that.
I worked for years a loan officer at a bank. So before I went to work for Joe, but yeah, totally get it. Um, for the most part, the industry is very good about helping each other. Everybody wants to help everybody up. The problem is getting true numbers. If they think you're going to build somewhere, of course, they're going to hedge their numbers. They'll tell them, I can't give the units away and I'm 50% occupied because they don't want the comps. But
Right.
for a most part, most of the people are pretty good to work with. I like to use the term the good old boys network. So there is a group of people that are real high up in storage that don't want to help anybody. Plain and simple. They've made their money and they're gonna bury as many people as they can. But for the most part, people are pretty good about helping.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about. I saw a fascinating statistic a week and a half ago. Radius Plus has their data where they show the deliveries of new self storage developments, and 2023 was the biggest year ever, which honestly surprised me because I thought we'd see a slowdown. Made sense in hindsight because all those projects were, you don't build a self-storage facility from start to finish in 8 months. It takes literally years. So you're talking about projects that got started in right after COVID, maybe, that opened their doors in 2023. But between 23 and 24, over 2,500 self-storage facilities came online. What was staggering to me is that more than half of those were in tertiary markets. And a lot of them are multi-story facilities. So I'm interested to pick your brain as somebody who understands this industry and the economics of it as well as anybody out there. Was that a significant oversaturation? Are we going to see some fallback from that of people maybe overbuilding as far as the type of unit in a tertiary market and just the sheer number of facilities that were built?
I believe that. I think there are some markets that are definitely overbuilt. However, in the early 80s, there were some markets that were already overbuilt. And I've been hearing the sky is falling every year, that now we're overbuilt, storage is going to be gone. The fact is, the average stays all the way up to 17 months now. The rates have gone up. I think part of the reason is the product. We have a lot more business tenants than we used to have. We used to be, you were lucky if you were 10% commercial. It was all residential. Now I don't manage anymore, but when I did, I had some sites that were as high as 50% were commercial.
Right.
So it's just, I think the type of product we have is let it stay as a viable real estate, and I don't see that changing. In good times, we buy a lot of stuff, and we got to put it somewhere. You got to love it here. And in bad times, God forbid we sell anything. It all goes into storage. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. The multi-story and tertiary markets, I have a hard time with, to be honest with you. I'm not a big believer of that. The only time I like to go multi-story is if you're paying either a fortune for the land, so you got to go up, or you're just in a market to where there's no big plots of land anymore where you want to be, so you don't really have a choice. Everything being equal, tertiary market, I just assume be all single stories, save the construction costs, make it easier. But if you do go multi-story, you have to train your managers to rent top to bottom. So these people that rent the whole first floor first, it's stupid. Start at the top floor. Most people are scared to ask. So unless they ask to be on the ground floor, put them upstairs. So yeah, rent top to bottom.
That's interesting you say that because there can be drastic price difference between the first floor and then second and third. Now we're seeing a lot more. If you go up, you go 4 stories. The IBC, the building code, changed in 21 so that you don't have to get crazy with your fireproofing. Doesn't crazy change the price of build to go to a fourth floor, but there's a stark difference between an average rate you might project on floor 1 versus 2, 3, and 4. When you're doing a pro forma, how much of a difference are you projecting there?
I actually don't. I set a flat rate, and that's what my upstairs rates are. And that makes it sound like even my first floor are those same rates, but again, rent top to bottom. So if the tenant says, okay, I'm $80 for the 10 by 10 up here, but I really want to be on the first floor, I've seen that as much as double, go up to 160 and be like, well, if you want the first floor, that's the price. And all that is extra profit.
Right.
But no, when I do a feasibility, I don't try to break it out by floor. It's all the same price, but it's what I think the first floor should be able to get, but that's what I get for everything else. And then we just, as the manager, can upsell the first floor.
And if you happen to end up getting more for the first floor, it's just gravy.
It's just gravy. Now, I will tell you, there's people like me out there. When I used to manage, I had a property in Vegas that we just opened, 3-story, multi-story, and my closest competitor was a multi-story. And when I shopped him, when I went in, he said, you don't want to rent here because all I have are upstairs units. He was completely full on the first, but upstairs. Well, it gets better. So I left. Then once we opened, we tried to go to him and told him, hey, I'll give you $25 for every referral you'll give me. Now, the guy didn't even like to rent his own unit, so he wasn't going to give me any referrals. However, at the end of the month, I brought him $100 and told him, thank you for the 4 referrals. He, after that, was kicking us 10 units a week.
Oh, my
Come to
goodness.
find out, the reason was, which is terrible, his uncle owned the place, and he didn't think his uncle paid him enough money. So he loved the fact I was giving him a referral. I'll bet you we probably got the facility open that we opened had about 900 units, and I'll bet you he referred a good 250 to 300 of them.
Oh, that's hilarious. Capitalism is a wonderful thing, right?
Yeah,
You do what
it's
you
one of
got to
those things
do.
I'll never. When he told me it was his uncle, I about dropped because I couldn't tell
Oh,
him what I was doing. But anyway,
blood
rent
is
top to
not
bottom
thicker
and
than a dollar.
refer. And again, these people that do referrals, like I just said, because you get all the time, that never works. And you're right, it doesn't. So just take $100 for that first month. Once they see $100 bill, oh yeah, they'll refer to you. Then you get a lot.
This makes me go down the path with you because you have so many incredible stories about your journeys in self-storage. Now I just want to ask you to give me some good stories that you have from your time, whether it's managing or you not only did you manage in stores, you became a regional manager, but you also third party managed and
Yes.
operated facilities for people as well. Tell me some of the really cool stories you run into in your time in storage.
Well, let's see. I always wanted to be on ESPN, a big sports fan. And in 2002, the Olympics were here in Salt Lake. And there's a whole story on ESPN on us because the storage unit where they were storing the runners for our bobsleds was in my storage unit and they were stolen. And they think
Steve
they were
Ross.
stolen because when they moved in, the runners were kept in Winchester gun cases. That Winchester was their sponsor. So they figure it was probably a homeless guy or somebody saw it, thought he was getting guns, didn't know what they were. And here's the sad part. They figured they were melted down for scrap. And the one set of runners that we had was worth over $500,000.
Oh,
And it was a German metallurgist that had done them. So they couldn't replicate it.
oh,
So that was a fun one. So anyway, I got to be on ESPN. Like I said, I've had bodies, California, Nevada, Utah, Florida. But again, I've managed thousands of these, so you can't let that scare you away. I mean, it's just, it happens. I used to have a property in Florida where, this is a fun one, Kelly McGillis and
Top Gun. That's going back.
Jimmy Buffett had units with us. This was a
Nice.
property the guy had built too close to the shore, so it flooded every night. The tide come in. So this is one of those locations. You had the pallet higher than the water line inside of your unit, so we kept free pallets out. I'm a big believer that if you're over 94% occupied, your rents are too cheap, so you should raise them. However, in this case, didn't matter what we charged. We were 100% occupied. So he would
Wow.
come in, do his lock check. If there was a vacant unit, he would call his waiting list, and the first one there would get it. His exact words to me were, because he's older, he knew the show. He goes, it's like the Cannonball Run. He goes, the first people would come flying down his street to get his unit, and I paid that manager a 40-hour week. He never worked in the site more than a few hours, and then he would go sailing every day. He was down in the Keys.
Love it.
So, I mean, that was a good story there.
Listen, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're running. I try to honor the 30-minute time thing. We
Oh,
always go a
perfect.
little over, but
Ask your next
I have
question.
some questions I want to ask you before we go, specifically about your kids, because you've turned this cutting edge feasibility study into a family business. And I kind of was lucky. I got to watch that actually happen while I was still at Legacy Developers and seeing a bunch of feasibilities from you. Talk to me about the joy of your son and your daughter and now having them work with you.
Oh, that's great. I've been training my son and my daughter for about 8, 9 years on how to do feasibilities. They're really good at the storage ones now and multi-story, and I still review them all. And I'm just now starting to train them on how to do flex space because I wanted to make sure I understood it well enough. But it's nice because my son, even when I worked at Extra Space, they knew that I needed time off to be able to coach Little League and stuff. And when my son got out of high school, he came to me first and said, I want to be the dad that can go to all the Little League stuff like you. So train me. So I told him he had to go to college for a year. That was required. So he did 1 year of college. And then, just like me, I made my kids live on site at a facility for at least a year. So, and they both did and did a good job. But no, it's nice. I get to see my kids that way and they get to be their stay at home dad. And yeah, I love it.
And now it's not just your kids that you get to see. Tell me a little bit about that. You've become pretty you've got a hard line in the sand about your Tuesdays and Fridays and
Oh,
how Steve
Tuesdays,
Ross lives his
Thursdays.
life.
Yep.
Like, sorry about that.
No, but you're right. I get, we get my grandkids usually Tuesdays or Thursdays. It's one of those 2 days. And when they're here, that's a day I don't work as much and I play. And if I have a Zoom call, I mean, it wouldn't be one like you, but if I have a Zoom call with clients, it's more often than not. If it's those days, I got my 18-month-old grandson on my lap. And I've only had one guy lately. Said it was unprofessional and didn't like it. So I told him we weren't a good fit. And I refunded his money for his deposit on a feasibility. But no, I love it. I get to see my grandkids at least, and then we get them every Sunday because my kids play intramural softball, so we watch the grandkids so they can go play. So no, I wouldn't trade that for anything.
I have so much respect for that as somebody who is at all my kids' soccer games and all their activities. And like, there's a line there where, and I love that money tells it, right? When you're willing to send somebody money back because of that, a lack of alignment, I just have so much respect for that. Last thing I want to ask you before we start to wrap this thing up is about the current climate. You're like on the front line. Everyone's talking about a significant pullback in ground up development, specifically to self-storage. Not necessarily boat and RV and flex, which you also do feasibilities for, but talk to me a little about what you're seeing because you're one of those people that's on the front line. Developers are calling you for feasibilities. Are you starting to feel that as we get, and God, it's hard to believe it's July 25th as we're taping this of 2025. It blows my mind that we're already that more than halfway through 2025. But tell me what you're seeing from a sheer number and volume of ground up development.
Used to be probably 80% of my reports just a couple years ago were some type of self-storage, temperature control, whatever, but traditional storage. And then you had about 20% of some type of flex or boat and that. Now, I'll bet you 20% are traditional storage, nothing else. The last year, I'm seeing by far the most that I'm seeing is boat and RV. And then I see maybe now about 20% of flex space. However, the main thing I've been seeing in the last probably year is some type of blend of that. I'm seeing like storage or boat and RV being with some flex space or what. So I'm seeing a blend of more than one thing. But storage still isn't going to go anywhere. Traditional storage, it may be down. It ain't going anywhere. I mean, people look to buy their stuff, so I'm not worried about that at all.
If there's one thing we can be sure of, it's that people aren't going to start throwing stuff away. Armand Agajanians, who's on LinkedIn all the time, he's like, we compete with the trash can, not with the neighboring facility. And I laugh because self-storage has won that competition with the trash can for a very long time. No reason to think that's going to change. Steve, so blessed to have you come on the show. We've known each other for me, relative to my time in storage, for a long time. So glad we could make this happen. It was so cool to hang out and break bread with you earlier this week and get to hear you speak. I was going to dig in, and you brought it up about just the percentages and the changes in your feasibility studies. I think you and I are alike, though. Self-storage is certainly going to be perfectly okay in the long term. And if there is a downturn in development, it's going to turn right back around here in a few years, and we'll be okay. So appreciate you so much. Looking forward to continuing and getting to see you again here soon. And thank you so much for the time on the podcast.
Absolutely. You guys take care. Stay safe.
Have a great one, Steve.
All right. Bye-bye.